Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. It's the middle of December. It's Savatage time. You pick Streets. I'm very, very happy to talk about this. But before we get to Savatage, how are you, my friend?
Doing well. A lot of really fun chatter following our Faith No More episode, which has been really kind of fun to see.
I had no idea these guys were so popular amongst the metal crowd. I kind of always thought of them as like an alternative band. They're obviously got the funk thing going on. I just never realized how popular they were. So it was good to see. I got to be honest with you. Lots of opinions. I learned a bunch of new stuff about this band just from reading some of the comments. And I went back and I did listen to Angel Dust. I gave it 2 listens. I actually listened to it this morning on my way into work. And then I listened to it again at my office, much to the chagrin of all my people that were walking by my office. But nonetheless, I was listening to it. I listened to it twice today. Very interesting stuff. A little more, a little heavier, I think. A little more metal in many ways and not quite as commercial. But there was some really interesting stuff. There was the one track, and the name escapes me. I don't have it in front of me, but it actually starts with or I should say it not starts, but there's parts of the song where you actually hear a cheer squad. And I thought it was like, Be Aggressive, I think is the song or whatever. And they actually start this chant. I thought I was back playing football or something like that. I didn't know what was going on, but it was a really interesting listen. And I can see why metalheads are drawn to that album in particular.
Cool. I didn't get a chance to listen to it, although, honestly, I didn't really hear much of anything new since the last time we talked. Just because, again, I'm burning my way through albums that came out this year, and moving things up and down the list, and working frantically to get this this list finalized. But I am really just in this glut of like average to above average albums. Like, I think I've made my way through all the top flight stuff that came out, in my opinion, and now it's just kind of ordering all the kind of middle of the road kind of stuff. We've been saying throughout the year, like, just a lot of really good albums have come out this year, but just not a lot of really great albums. So, like, ordering all the really good albums has been the hardest part. So it continues, but I also did listen to a little album called Streets, a Rock Opera. Maybe you've heard of it.
I have heard of it. I'll say this. I also did not have a chance to listen to much new stuff, although somebody, I think it was Brian Clough, had posted a band out of Philly called Crip Sermon, this doom band, which has like a couple of albums out that came out over the last 10 years or so. The reason I bring this up is A, appreciate the recommendation, B, I liked it a lot, and C, I think that doom is probably the one standout genre this year. And as a guy who's not like the biggest doom fan, I thought it was interesting that was the one type of music that really stood out amongst a sea of other stuff. I'm also having a real difficult time kind of formulating this list. I happen to have the week off between Christmas and New Year's. So I'll be honest with you, I'll be spending a lot of time that week just kind of putting it all together, and then obviously we'll release the episode shortly into 2023 as we start gearing up towards another year of the podcast, which is awesome.
Very nice. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to make these lists, I have to say. It's every year I promise myself I'm going to do a better job of keeping track of things, and every year I fail. So,
well, listen, it's
it's a lot like it's a lot like my career as a student, where I just left everything to the last minute, and then had to bullshit my way through something at the very last moment. So,
but it worked for you. So you've got experience, if nothing else.
I'm still here. I still have a job. So I mean, I guess something worked. I guess.
Let's go back in time. October 4th, 1991. This is Streets, a Rock Opera. It's Savatage's 6th studio album. We've gone back and we've talked about Dead Winter Dead, and we've done Edge of Thorns, so we've done 2 of the Zach Stevens albums. But we're going back even further now to one of the last, really the last album that John Oliva did lead vocals on the entire album. a very good choice. I know it was between this and Gutter Ballet. I personally am looking forward to when we talk about Sirens and some of that really old stuff that, kind of gets glossed over. But this album, where do I start? I guess I'll start with, how did you get it? And was it the first Savatage album you got? Was it basically where did this kind of fit in terms of your acquiring their massive discography?
I believe this was the third Savatage album I got. After Handful of Rain was the first one, then Gutter Ballet, and then Streets was the third one. And, this would have been back in 97. Like June would be when I first started listening to the vaunted mixtape that Ralph made me for my birthday. And it had Chance and Gutter Ballet on it as the two Savatage entries, one by Zach, one by John. And so I remember when I wanted to go and buy my first Savatage album, it was between those two. And I went with Handful of Rain just blindly based on just the one song. And it just started a love affair from there. And I went to get Gutter Ballet next. And it was probably Pat who said, the next Savatage album you have to get is Streets after those two. And so I believe I asked for it for Christmas that year, but then my cousin took me Christmas shopping before Christmas, and I didn't know if my parents were going to get it for me or whatever, so I just had her buy it for me ahead of time. And then my parents did end up getting it for me, so I gave it to Mike, who I spoke to today about it, and it was funny because he said that Streets always makes him think of Christmas time. And I said, well, I think I might know why. And he said, also I think like kind of the bells at the beginning of the tracks and everything, it kind of has like a kind of a wintry kind of feel to it. And I know we've talked about it that this could be considered the first Trans-Siberian Orchestra album in a lot of ways, or just the beginnings of what would turn into that. Because
more so than Handful of Rain, more so than Edge of Thorns, I feel like this really is, and I'll get into it more with certain tracks, but for my money, this is where TSO started with this album, because they had this rock opera concept, I guess, that had been kind of tossed about for years, and they finally decided to do it. And the story is kind of interesting because as it goes, Chris Oliva, may he rest in peace, went into Paul O'Neill's house and pulled out this rock opera that Paul O'Neill had kind of put together in 1979, and it would ultimately become the story for what this album is. And you can see it, right? This album belongs on Broadway. This album is it has enough of a story behind it, and the music especially has that big time Broadway show feel to it.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. No, that's
keep
all
going.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It dawned on me that this could be, if they ever wanted to, TSO could start touring outside of the Christmas season.
This is the album.
And yeah, and then you could do Streets, and you could do Dead Winter Dead, and you could do Wake of Magellan. But I mean, I think this is really what lends itself to that kind of style.
Without a doubt.
And I actually went back and listened to the narrated edition just to kind of fill in all that story that I think the lyrics do a pretty good job of telling the story, but then you really have this character, which he literally calls himself as such. But there's this whole extended story that he tells the whole way through. That's really interesting. I don't know for a fact. It sounds like it might have been John Oliva playing the character. It certainly sounds like a kind of exaggerated version of John. Another thing too, just looking at that album cover and looking at how thin John Oliva was in that photo, it's mind-boggling that it's the same guy, because he almost looks like too thin on the album. But yeah, this is, as soon as I started listening to this album, Jesus Saves just smashed me right across the face. I was obsessed with this album, Savatage, everything. The the ballads, just, Believe and If I Go Away and Somewhere in Time, they all just blew me away. I think probably Edge of Thorns might have been, or maybe even Dead Winter Dead was actually my next Savatage album, then Edge of Thorns. I don't really remember. And then I really started digging into the older stuff, mostly because we ran out of the newer Savatage stuff to listen to. But I mean, you have Bob Kinkle is a part of this as the, he does the keyboards and he's a conductor and stuff. And he was the original conductor for TSO when they first started touring. And so this has all of the personnel that would eventually be a part of what TSO would become. And so I think a guy like Paul O'Neill had much grander visions than what he was doing on with Savatage at this time. And I think this is kind of the beginnings of that. And you really see this magical pairing of him and John Oliva together, and even Chris Oliva as well. Like, just he was the magic that made Savatage kind of go past being this classic metal band. And then once he came on board with Hall of the Mountain King, all of a sudden some of these real grandiose ideas are starting to come through. I mean, even if you going back to that album, the whole intro, the Prelude to Madness, which is this whole, classical piece done in a metal style that TSO would go on to play. It's, oh man, I could already tell that I'm just going to be very long-winded for the next hour and a half to 3 hours.
There's nothing wrong with that, although I do have work in the morning, so I'll put that out there. But kidding aside, I want to hit on a couple of things you said. I had never paid attention to the narrated version. I had never really listened to it, to be honest with you. But I'm glad I did, and it was at your recommendation because it does kind of fill in any questions that you have about the story, number one. Number two, this was probably the biggest surprise. The rendition of Jesus Saves on that album is completely different than the regular song on the actual album. The rest of the album is the same, but for whatever reason, they put a completely jazzed up version of Jesus Saves, which is worth hearing if you've never heard it, just because it's interesting. I've never heard anything like it.
That's the version, if they ever made a Broadway show, that they would do, because there's gospel singers and like it's a real, like, it starts out as almost like a ballad and then it turns into this like mid tempo, like just like gospel-y kind of like, it's really cool. I think it was originally released on a compilation that had come out. I'm not even sure if it was something that you would have been able to get in the States. I think it was called From the Gutter to the Stage, and it had a bonus disc on it with 4 unreleased Savatage songs on it, and that happened to be one of them. It was labeled DT Jesus. But apparently that was what the song was originally supposed to sound like, I guess, and it turned into a like fast-paced, like really groovy rocking song that I think is probably the most well-known song on the album. But like you said, it was that version, that kind of more mid-paced gospel-y version that they used on the narrated version, I think lends to the story. If you're going to listen to this whole narrated version of it, it is kind of cool. And I think I've also listened to the original version, or the more well-known version of Jesus Saves so many times that I've kind of killed it. So maybe Jesus will resurrect it, but yeah, so it was kind of cool to hear a kind of a different version of it.
What was also interesting to me is, and you said it, we picked this up in '97. The album had come out 6 years prior, but in my head, it seems much older than it actually is. Like, we only picked it up 6 years after the fact. That would be like us picking up an album from 2016. It's yesterday, right? But at the time, it just seemed like an ancient, old album. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, we hadn't been around that long at that point.
Maybe I'm just showing my age.
That was a third of our life ago at that point.
That's true. I guess it would be like going back like 15 or 14 years now, right? So I'm with you. But it is interesting. And just to round that out, I know we've kind of made mention of a lot of these folks, but John Oliva on vocals, Chris Oliva obviously doing the guitar work, Johnny Lee Middleton on bass, and Steve Dr. Death Wackholz on drums. This to many,
I think it's Dr. Kill drums.
Yeah, I know. I'm just having a little fun at his expense, but welcome to
Sassafras.
For many people, this is like the classic Savatage lineup, right? And it's ironic because this is before Chris Caffrey had formally joined the band, although I have reason to believe that he might have done a couple of things on this album because he was touring with them in Gutter Ballet, so he was probably there and around, but he doesn't get any credit for being on this. I'm not sure. Let me ask you this. We've listened to this album 10,000 times over the course of the last 25 years. Does it hold up just as well as you thought it might? I mean, I'm sure you haven't listened to it probably in a few years, I would think. Does it hold up for you?
Yeah, definitely. It's just one of those albums that I'm speaking for you, so tell me if I'm wrong, but you just have to listen to every now and again just to remind yourself of how good it is. And it never really disappoints, but I think it's safe to say I haven't listened to the whole thing start to finish since we saw them play, or since we saw John Olivas Payne perform the entire album at Prague Power, which was 2014. So that was 8 years ago. So it's been a while.
But it was, to me, it's like chicken soup, right? It's just an album that's good for the soul, and that it's like comfort food. As soon as you have it, you feel like you're in that happy spot. You're secure. It's nothing you haven't heard. It's nothing you haven't tasted. But it's just good old fashioned Savatage comfort food. And what I think was interesting, at least for my money, this was so much more polished than anything that they had done prior to. Even Gutter Ballet, which was the polish was starting to kind of shine a little bit. They took it to a whole nother level. And it was like all the bells and whistles and the top notch production. And it was a step up across the board for them, even if they were kind of going in a little bit of a different direction. Because I think of Power of the Night, or Hall of the Mountain King. This is a stark departure from those two albums that had come out, 5 years prior.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, even since Gutter Ballet, I think, like you said, I think there's a marked improvement in the production and and just the overall sound. I think that there's hints of what's to come on Gutter Ballet. I'm really excited to actually talk about that. It was not as easy as I made it sound when I said I was going with Streets over Gutter Ballet, because I hold both albums in very high regard. But I just felt like after hearing If I Go Away at TSO and again sharing Mike's sentiment that there's kind of I hold a Christmas kind of vibe to this album, and then just with the TSO connection, it all kind of comes full circle. It just seemed like it was the right call, and I'm sure we'll talk about Gutter Ballet by the time it's all said and done. We'll have talked about all of the Savatage albums, and we'll finish year 11 with Fight for the Rock, I'm sure. But maybe there'll be a new album to talk about by then, God willing. But yeah, I agree that like they went from being maybe what you would consider like maybe a godfather of power metal type of band. Power metal before power metal was really a thing. I think we've talked about like Iron Maiden that way and Manowar, like just kind of, they were there doing powerful metal before power metal was really like a thing that got invented in Germany or whatever. And in the late 80s, I think that the inclusion of Paul O'Neill brought in more progressive and more classical and more Broadway and more like, and to use a word we use a lot, bombastic, just a lot more like just theatricalness to the whole brand. And again, like I said, like you start to see that with Prelude to Madness, and then there's Summer's Rain is on Gutter Ballet is a really just a really over the top and dramatic song. You could see that there's this like creativity that's just waiting to burst. And this is the album where it all kind of happens. And it's pretty amazing to think about that. It's it was like stifled from what the grand original idea was, that this was going to be this double album. Boy, like back then, a band couldn't get a double album out unless you were Bruce Springsteen coming out with The River in 1980 or whatever. Like you had to have a history to get away with it, because Halloween got shot down trying to do a Keeper of the Seven Keys double album in the late 80s. Savatage, there's a number of songs. There's a whole list of them on Wikipedia. Some of them have seen the light of day, and a lot of them haven't. I don't know if there's even recordings of them anywhere.
How much would you want to hear those albums or those cuts? You know,
it makes you wonder with Paul gone, if there'd even be access to those songs, if there's sheet music, if there's anything, like if it were to be recreated somehow. You could find Larry Elbows as a bonus track on the narrated version of Streets. Mike Apple was not included. That's an inside joke. You'll have to ask us about that. Stay and Desiree were two songs that were included. Savatage had a whole bunch of reissues. I think they were European reissues in the late 90s, and each album had a bonus track, and it would be John singing a Zach song or Zach singing a John song. But then they had Stay, and I think Stay was sung by John and Desiree, which Desiree may be one of the most underrated Savatage songs, by the way. Zach sings that one. It's a really beautiful ballad. So based on that, and based on some of the information, it sounds like there were more characters that were supposed to be a part of the story. I'm wondering if Desiree might be the ex-girlfriend that he tries to call and can't get in touch with. And Stay is supposed to be about a character named Duke. So there's, and through the narrated version, which we'll talk about, you realize that there's kind of more players in this musical play than just Jesus and the story. It's really interesting. I think I have a kind of a new appreciation for the actual story after re-listening to this narrated version. So now you speak. I'm just rambling at this point.
Highly recommended for those that haven't heard this narrated version. If you're familiar with the original album, take the time to listen to this narrated version. I think it only adds about 6 or 8 minutes to the actual album, but it definitely gives it some more color, as we mentioned earlier. I think that for me, the biggest thing I can say about this, I'll quote Aristotle, and I'll just say that the whole is really greater than the sum of the parts here. Not that there aren't great songs on here. There are some fantastic songs, but there's certain like a song like St. Patrick's, and we'll talk about them, I'm sure. But like, to me, that's not a perfect song. There's other tracks on here that are not great, but when you put it all together and you add the story elements and some of these other iconic tracks, you have something that is just truly greater than each of the individual tracks on their own merit necessarily. For example, a track like St. Patrick's or something, which again, I use that as an example. Not that it's a bad track, but it's not the best track on the album by any means. You know, there's certain songs or on other albums that I'll give a demerit to, and I'll say, oh, that's why the album's not a 10, right? Because it's got 3 or 4 tracks that are just not as good. Here, it almost doesn't matter, because when the whole package together, you almost forget about some of like the songs that may not be my favorite or something like that. It's stronger as a whole, despite the imperfections.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think that the story also, because each song is part of the story, even if there's a song, there were songs that St. Patrick's is not one of them for me, but like there's songs that maybe like Can You Hear Me Now or New York City Don't Mean Nothing, like, are two of the songs that were never like on my top half of songs on this album. But like when you know what the songs mean in terms of the story of the album, it gives it a whole new, you know, a new vibe. And so like I agree with what you say. Like this, like on their own, the songs don't have as much punch as they do when it's one complete, you know, hour-long package.
And how many, even though it came out as a single disc, how many bands were doing concept albums at this point? I mean, Operation Mindcrime was out, so there's one. but metal
Well,
bands
according to
aren't.
Chris Caffery, this was the first one ever done.
Yeah,
So
well, I mean, I think Chris DeGarmo might disagree, and Jeff Tate would definitely disagree. But I'll leave that for another day. Um, Before we get into it, how do you pick a song of the week on this thing?
I, you throw a dart, put on your blindfold, and throw a dart at the wall, and I mean, who the hell knows? I feel like every time I listen to it, there's one song that stands out to me more than others, and it might have something to do with my mood at the time or whatever.
I agree. I agree.
I'm not
And
even sure I know what mine is at this point, but I'll just have to choose it as we move along.
I think that mood has a lot to do with it because some of these ballads are so iconic. It just depends on whether or not you're in the mood for that, or if you want something with a little more, chunk to it, I guess. What's interesting to me is that this album starts with what I guess is the longest song on the album, called Streets. It's almost 7 minutes long. I've always considered this to be just a big introductory track. Like, to me, it's just an intro. And even though it kind of touches upon a lot of different things, it really just sets the tone for this whole thing. It's an intriguing track. You listen to it and you're like, where is this going, with the creepy bells and the children's choir, the haunting keyboard, and obviously that just signature Chris Oliva guitar sound, and even backing vocals, which I don't know if they had employed very much on many of the prior albums. This is the track that kind of sets the table for the entire album, even though it's the longest track on there. But to me, it's really nothing more than an exaggerated intro.
Yeah, that's kind of what I used to think. And then I think the last few times, I think it was almost like, all right, let's get to the point. Like, Jesus Saves is coming, and Tonight He Grins Again is coming. Like, let's get cracking. But I think getting prepped and re-listening to this album in anticipation of hearing the whole thing live, I had a whole new appreciation for this song.
I love it. I don't want to be. I'm not denigrating it. I just think it really just is kind of the table setter. But no, go ahead.
Well, I think that was really the whole point. But I don't know. I never really thought much of it for a long time, and then it just kind of in the last few years it dawned on me like what a great song it is, and the fact that it is opening up like one of my favorite albums and an album that I have such fond memories of, kind of made it feel more important. It was almost like time made it better. And it has kind of that like TSO kind of kiss to it, where there's just, you can hear the drama of the story already starting to take place, of like, children begging and like things like that. Like, it was just setting this, you could almost picture like this, a cold winter night in New York City. Like it's the magic of Paul and John together, that they just paint a picture musically that like a lot of people just can't compete with.
And to that point, maybe that's part of the reason this resonates for me as much as it does. Having been born in New York City, working in New York City, I mean, I'm in New York City almost every day of my life, right? And
that so don't mean nothing.
Yeah, very, very good. I have a special relationship, or a special there's a special intrigue, because there's sights and sounds on this album that I hear every single day. And like Jesus Saves, right? It starts with this guy who's kind of the narrator, right, asking for a quarter. And I say to myself, there's not a day that goes by that doesn't happen to me. And then you hear like the opening of the bus doors and the honking of the cars and the people in the background. It's like the story of my life. So it's something I can definitely relate to. And then it serves as a very nice intro to what is, in my opinion, really the opening song on the album, with this crunchy guitar riff, heavy song, but uplifting, right? It's heavy, but it's also got this uplifting feeling of like this guy kind of transcending his lot in life, or his rank, to become like this, cult hero, if you will, on the stage. I think it's a beautiful song. I definitely played it out because as a kid, this was probably my favorite track on the album. But it's given me I got a new lease on it, both the jazzy version and even hearing the original, just because it had been so long since I heard it.
I was going back and, as I tend to do, I go back and listen to, the most recent episode that we do once it posts and it shows up in my podcast feed, and I kind of just scan through it to make sure all the musical transitions sound good, even though, I knew they sounded good or I wouldn't have dropped them. But I mean, I like to just listen to it and just give us that one extra listen, and I got up to the point where, we start talking about doing this album, and I used Jesus Saves as kind of the intro to that. And I was just like, man, you just hear this song and it's just kind of like, shit, like, gotta listen to All the Streets now. Like, it's kind of hard to just listen to this song alone. I remember the very first time I got a Savatage compilation, I think this and Agony and Ecstasy were the two songs from Streets that were, and Believe, obviously, were represented on it. And it was odd hearing them on a compilation just completely taken out of the context of the story.
It loses something.
Also, like, just the whole intro with the narration and everything, which that's the narration everybody knows. Just a picture of this same guy for the whole album, and that's the narrated version. But I guess they felt like that they just needed him to tell the kind of intro of the story, and then that was it. I find like it's like almost kind of hard. I can't unhear his narration of the rest of the story, like the part where he was like, "Are you gonna finish that cigarette?" oh, Unfiltered Camel, that's my favorite. I was like, oh my, it's just like you said, it's like a page right out of reality, so the strange reality, if you will. But it's great. Or like where the loud car goes by and he's like, "Oh, get a muffler or something." Like, it's just just that.
It's just called Tuesday for me, right? Like this.
Yeah, just like some strange guy just wandering around babbling crap in the city. I mean, it's every day.
Literally the story of my life. We get to Tonight He Grins Again. I don't know that I appreciated this track as much as I should have back in the day, and maybe it's because it was following Jesus Saves. But I absolutely, positively adore this tune now. So much so that on an album where there could probably be 10 songs of the week, I'm going to make it mine. Let's give it a listen, and then I'll kind of tell you why I'm choosing it.
Wander the streets alone, the lost in search of his own. Once again I played the clown, used my friends and let them down. Walk the streets just staring out, late at night the strange come out. Time again, I'm just looking for a friend, but no one seems to be around. Just this monkey that I found still is my only friend. And tonight he grins again. Tonight he grins again. Oh, yeah. Tonight he grins again.
There's this like beautiful simplicity with this song, and I find that many Savatage songs have this effect. It's not the most complicated music in the world in many ways, and I think back to that John Oliva clinic we saw him do at Atlanta, where he actually made a song that wound up on one of his solo albums in front of 50 people or 100 people that were watching him just literally put a song together out of the blue. It's just so simple, but so passionate in many ways. It's just so like it just the hooks are there and it just kind of gets you. But why I choose this track in particular is, for me, this was the bridging of the gap for Savatage. There are elements of their older stuff that are on this track, and then there's elements of stuff from like Dead Winter Dead and The Wake of Magellan, and this is like the perfect marriage of old and new Savatage with awesome keyboards and one of my favorite Chris Oliva performances on any song. It is dark, but so catchy. It's just a beautiful track.
There's a really, really good like pro shot version of this song performed live, which, think about how long it's been since Savatage was an active band. Like, pro shot material is kind of few and far between when you just go on YouTube and you're looking for some high quality Savatage live stuff. We should probably share this one during the week, just because I always go back to it. I'm like, my God, like John performed this song live as good as you'd think this would be a difficult song to sing live. And fast forward years after that, to me, it's one of the most memorable songs that they performed at Prague Power. Him just sitting there playing the piano and looking up to Chris Oliva every time he had to hit a high note. Like, it was, the whole performance was an emotional roller coaster, but I specifically remember that song in particular just really standing out. And mad props to the whole band, who had the unenviable job of recreating a Savatage album without any of the original members of Savatage outside of the Mountain King himself. But to echo your sentiments, this has gone down as one of my absolute favorite songs on the album, and I always look forward to hearing it. It's such a great follow up to Streets, because Streets is like you said, it kind of has like this really upbeat kind of almost anthemic kind of vibe to it, and then now you're getting to the part of the story where the drugs are calling out to him, and that's that monkey that they talk about in the song, the monkey on his back. So again, with the storyline involved, I think the song takes on even more meaning. If you know anything about John Oliva, takes on even more meaning in reality. So yeah, I think that it's again, we'll probably beat this to death in the years that we'll spend talking about this band, but they are masters of every type of song. It could be they're one of the best when it comes to rock ballads, one of the best when it comes to rock anthems, mid-tempo. They do everything fantastically. And so Streets into Tonight He Grins Again is a perfect example of two songs that sound absolutely nothing alike, but are both incredible songs.
Yeah, well said. And it's at this point, to what you said, where the album really starts to take this turn, and Strange Reality, I think, is really a turning point on the album, on an album with many turning points. Talk to me about your thoughts on this, because there's one part of this song in particular, which I'll get to, but I want to give you the floor and see if you pick up on it. But there's one part of this song in particular, which I think is brilliantly done.
Yeah. So like, I always considered this to be one of the kind of like mid songs, like,
right.
To quote MJF, it's kind of mid. But it's another song I think I appreciate more nowadays, just because I think just it's following this like very theatrical song, Tonight He Grins Again, and this one's just a little bit middle of the road pedestrian compared to like Jesus Saves and Tonight He Grins Again. This is just kind of a straightforward kind of rocker type of song. I'm curious your thoughts on this one. I do like this song. It's not one of my favorites on the album, but I think I like it a lot more than I did when I was younger. This was almost like almost a skipper for me, probably back in the day, that it's not anymore.
I echo those sentiments. I definitely like it more now, but what really popped to me this time, and it's something that I just never heard before, the last guitar solo on this song, which is phenomenal, by the way, but the last solo is like a guitar solo which kind of goes off the rails a little bit, and it actually reminds me of like somebody on drugs, like just kind of not doing so well, right? Like just really kind of battling those inner demons or what have you. And I thought that there was a brilliance in that, because of all the solos that Chris could have played, he plays this guitar solo almost like it gives you the impression that there's like something is not well here, or like somebody's like strung out. And I just thought that was so brilliant. I don't even know if it was intentional. I have to think it was, but to me, that makes a pedestrian song awesome, just because of that one guitar solo that kind of paints the picture for the the denigration, or I should say like the degeneration of this particular character, just kind of going into a downward spiral, to say.
Right. And so this is kind of the part in the story where Jesus runs into like this musician that he once idolized, and now he's just like this like down on his luck drunk. And just another, and it's in the narration, it's kind of just, he's just another alcoholic, I think, were the exact words used. And so like what you say might make complete sense, actually, that like, that's exactly what they were going for. Is this is kind of, it almost, represents the downward spiral that this other musician is taking. And a lot of the story is kind of like Jesus kind of coming to terms with what he doesn't want to end up, and actually seeing what his future could be. It's almost has very very Ghost of Christmas Future kind of vibe to it.
Yes.
But it's just kind of like, I mean, literally the lyrics are, that could be me, like that. It's a really a well-placed song in as far as the story goes. So I think that this one really benefits to having the the narration and the story kind of preceding it and giving you a little more context.
Yeah, and like only Savatage can. This album has 1 million ballads on it, and yet A Little Too Far, I guess the next track, is kind of the first real ballad of the bunch. But they're all great in their own way. Now, I'm not going to say, I mean, I think we could sit here and say, oh, I like Believe, I like a number of these ballads, but there's a lot of them on here. But A Little Too Far is the first, and it is definitely a memorable one. For my money, nobody writes a ballad better than Savatage. And all you need is John Oliva and a piano, and that's what you get on this track. And
a box of tissues.
And a box of tissues. That's all you need. And you had mentioned, various tracks at Prog Power. This, to me, was one of the standout tracks, where it's just a quiet room and Oliva, who has 1,200 people in the palm of his hand as he sits behind that piano. The irony, though, and I want to know if you remember this, this was at the end of their set. They played all of Streets, but they actually forgot to play A Little Too Far. So he kind of just added it on after Believe. And even then, he still had the room, in the palm of his hand. It was a little bit of a mess up, but the man has so much control over a room that it didn't matter.
I think there were people like yelling from the crowd at the end, like, yes, you didn't play. And he like, you could see the light bulb like turn on above his head. Like, oh shit. Like the whole band just completely missed it. And they're probably waiting for him to take their cues or whatever. And maybe they just figured like,
no, we're not
the mastermind decided we're not going to play it. And so he was just like, well, screw it. We'll play it at the end. This was always one of my least favorite of the many ballads on this album, I would say. I think maybe just because it's kind of the same thing, the same song just repeated in kind of a short amount of time. But that said, it's still better than 90% of any other band's ballad they've ever had. So I think it's just kind of the story of where he's kind of lamenting about like how he took things too far with the drinking and the drug use, that he blew his whole career and all that, and that this is kind of him lamenting about it before he kind of has this renaissance with the next song. But this is kind of showing, and I think the ballads also represent some of like the low points in the character's journey throughout this song. So I think this is one of those times, and then we'll get back to like that with St. Patrick's. This is like a real roller coaster, both from a story standpoint and also musically speaking. But this is just, I think, that part where he's kind of, lamenting where he's at, and especially after like meeting this vision of what he could end up, and not being remembered and just being just another alcoholic, like he says about the guy in Strange Reality. So, but yeah, I think it almost was even more powerful live, just with John, like you said, sitting there with his keyboard and like basically the puppet master in front of 1,200 people. Like just half of them were sobbing and the other half were just mouths agape in awe that they were even seeing it happen. I was both.
I gotta be honest with you, and I'll just throw it. Yeah, right, exactly. I want to throw this in there. This was right after Pain of Salvation had played all of Remedy Lane. Like, that is just nuts when you think about it. I mean, like, Remedy Lane is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I'm not really sure that anyone would have been able to follow that except for John Oliva, who, quite frankly, blew it out of the park.
That whole weekend was just crazy. You had mentioned that to me, and then I thinking about it, and I'm like, there were other albums that weekend, and then I was thinking about it, and I was like, shit, like just the night before, Seventh Wonder played Mercy Falls, only to be followed by Stradivarius playing Visions, and then the next day we are sponsoring Master Plan, seeing them play for the very first time right before Remedy Lane and Streets. I mean, it was insane. Like, you talk about, I think the only thing that kind of rivals that to me is like Royal Hunt playing Paradox, followed by Angra playing Holy Land. Just that 1-2 punch of two all-time albums, but 2 nights in a row of that. Like, that was, and I think Stradivarius wasn't billed as playing Visions. That was something that came about later on. The other 3, I think, were billed as these are the 3 albums that are going to be played. And the Stradivarius, maybe they felt left out. They were like,
we can do this too.
If everybody else is playing an album, why don't we? I mean, I can't think of like 4 more iconic sets, and they were all in the same 2-day span. Like, that was really pretty incredible.
Yeah, no argument for me. I just thought I would shoehorn that in there. We get to the Rise of Tex with You're Alive. This provides such a nice contrast to A Little Too Far, because this song is so uplifting. And to be completely honest with you, this to me could have been on that first TSO album and you would have not blinked. This song is, for my money, the first TSO song that was ever penned, because it literally sounds like it could have been on Christmas Eve and Other Stories. It's a touch faster than a lot of the songs that precede it, but I actually like the fact that it's kind of short. It's not a long track. It comes in at like 1 minute and 51 seconds, but like they cram a lot in there, and it didn't need to be longer. It was just a beautiful, beautiful track.
Yeah, I know on some of the liner notes or album backs, like they have this and Sammy and Tex is kind of like a, You're Alive / Sammy and Tex. Like it's almost supposed to go together, and they really do complement one another. Like, one is this like really upbeat, like life-affirming track, and the other one is just like fucking bar chaos. So that, I think there's such a cool dichotomy there between those 2 tracks. This was one of the songs that I really liked immediately the first time I heard it, because it just like, that's the kind of stuff that just sucks me in immediately, is when it just has a lot of energy and a lot of positive energy, and this song has that.
Well, I think that Sammy and Tex does not have that, right? Because it is just a blistering
and
heavy.
The way that You're Alive just abruptly ends, it's just perfect for storyline purposes, because all that joy just goes out the window almost immediately.
Yeah, and to me, like, as much as I think that You're Alive is like the first TSO song, Sammy and Tex could have been on Power of the Night and you wouldn't have blinked.
I thought you were going to say it's the first Dr. Butcher song.
Yeah, right, exactly. What is it? Yeah, that's another album I haven't listened to in forever. Good call. I'm going to play that tomorrow. I used to play the hell out of that album. It's probably not as good as I remember it, but I digress. We go from Sammy and Tex to another ballad in St. Patrick's, and I kind of referenced it earlier. It's probably not my favorite. I do like how it starts almost like a prayer. It almost feels like he goes to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and as someone who's been there countless times, it really is a transformative experience. What I don't love about the song, though, is even though it slowly starts to build and get heavier, they almost go into this like Russian march type of section that I never quite understood why they really just changed this song over. It's almost like a jig, and I just never, that took me out of the element, but I will say it ends very strong and it is very emotional. But for some reason, that middle section takes me out of the moment a little bit.
So it's in the storyline, DT gets reunited with his buddy Tex, and it's all this happiness, and then this guy Sammy, who's a pimp that DT, DT Jesus owes money to or whatever. He shows up and there's a fight breaks out and Tex ends up getting killed. And so St. Patrick's is the next part of the story where like now the elation is gone and now DT's in a bad place. And as any drug addict would know, like when you're down and out in a bad situation, where's your brain go? Goes to using again. And so this is kind of, in my opinion, this is like him reaching out to God. Like, I just lost one of my good friends. Like, I need some affirmation, something a little bit more otherworldly to kind of get me through this really garbage part of my life. And it's well named because this, in the story, he literally goes to St. Patrick's Cathedral and starts to pray. So something about the song hit me before we would see, John Oliva perform this whole album at Prog Power. And I remember listening to it before that and thinking to myself, oh my God, this song is going to just destroy me. I don't know why, but hearing it live is just going to it's just going to resonate in a way that's going to make me so emotional. And sure enough, when that day came, I was sobbing. I was standing
really?
like in the second row from the stage, and this song started playing, and something just absolutely came over me. I was like a disaster, and I don't think I've ever been like that at a concert. I've gotten weepy and teary, and that's not unusual. But what
was weird was that it was at an Enslaved show, but
yeah, I was at a Creator show and I just broke down.
That's just because you probably got kicked in the head when the horde started coming after you.
Yeah, I got kicked in the nose, so the tears came naturally. And to this day, it's the most emotional live music experience I've ever had in my life, and for that reason, this is my song of the week. And to this day, I can't listen to it and I just not feel the organs and the John Oliva's performance, the lyrics, the story. To me, this is just the epitome. I think this is a better ballad than Believe. And I know that's sacrilege to a lot of people. And If I Go Away, I think is a really, really good song too. And at one point that probably would have been my song of the week, especially when I was much younger. But this song, for whatever reason, has taken on a life of its own in my head. And so, I mean, I don't know what else to say, but yeah, I agree that it's weird that there's this kind of marchy part. I have to think that it represents something that he's kind of going through mentally, because it builds and it builds and it builds, and then John Oliva just lets out this scream, and it just goosebumps. It's just I don't know, and then it just slows down, and it goes back to that kind of piano whisper kind of thing, and then I'll even leave the dime to just finish it all. I mean, it's just a perfect, beautiful, unbelievable song with just the imagery, the like I said, the organs that sound like a church organ. It's just, I don't know. I can't think of a song being much better than this. So let's give it a listen, and I'll try not to cry again.
I have to say I was not expecting you to choose that, but I'm glad you did. I with that backdrop, I'm not sure how you could have selected anything else.
I hope I did it justice with that with that explanation.
A round of applause, I think. Can You Hear Me Now is the next track. This is another one of those ominous sounding tunes, and I love how it goes from like dark to dark and heavy. Like this song kind of just hits you in the face. And the lyrics on this would be used on many albums in the Savatage pantheon to come, just because they often recycle lyrics or portions of lyrics. This is an underrated song for me, and I think that parts of the instrumental section could have easily been on Dead Winter Dead, and you would have not have blinked and batted an eyelash. Just some of that instrumental section towards the end. And one person who we really haven't talked about much was Steve Wackholz. I thought his drum fills on this track were just phenomenal and some of the most underrated, coolest drum fills on the entire album.
I mean, well said. I think that oftentimes the Oliva brother plus Paul O'Neill trifecta just overshadows everything else that's going on. But you have to understand that like these other members of Savatage through the years are all pretty unbelievable musicians, and Steve Wackles is no exception. Jeff Plate, another outstanding drummer. Chris Caffrey, an unbelievable guitarist. Al Pitrelli, even more so, technically proficient, a one-time member of Megadeth. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of quality members in this band, but I mean, I think they do just tend to get kind of overshadowed by this magical team of voice, guitar, and concept. This is another one of those songs, like kind of I mentioned before, where I didn't really think a lot of it when I was younger, and now it really, especially after that last song, you really need like something a little bit more upbeat after something like that. Like that was a very emotional point in the story. So I think now we're at another point in the story where you're almost in between, like, is he going to go up or is he going to go down? And so the song kind of keeps you right in the middle of that path, making it still a little unsure where you're going. And I think that in the storyline, it's kind of like him calling out to Tex, like, can you hear me now? Like, like, are you still out there? Like, struggling with death. Man, as a kid, I had no way to relate to what the hell they were trying to tell with this story, and how like I think it's very relatable, especially for like anybody that's had addiction or was a musician and has gone up and down the
rise
popularity
and fall
train. Yeah. It's just really beautifully done, just overall. But this is, I think, another part of the story that's kind of cool. And again, it's another like really good mid-paced Savatage song. And then again, like just that you get like that Chris Oliva guitar solo that's so pronounced and so well done, but with those orchestrations and those keyboards in the background, that magic of that brother and brother combo, that like it was just, it's some of these songs like this that where I used to think they were kind of more of filler type songs. It's the solos that I go to now where I'm just like, man, there's so much meat on the bone here that I just didn't pay attention to. It's like when you're a kid and you don't eat buffalo wings correctly and you throw the bone out and there's a shit ton of meat still on it. And then somebody who knows better shows you like, hey, idiot, you're supposed to eat all the meat off the bone, stupid. So yes, that's my Buffalo Wing Streets
Last
connection.
week was Five Guys. This week it's Buffalo Wild Wings. New York City Don't Mean Nothing. You had mentioned it earlier, and you said it might not be your favorite track on here. I think it's an absolutely underrated gem. I love the acoustic guitar at the start. I think that it's reminds me a lot of the bonus tracks that they've kind of re-recorded over the years in an acoustic fashion. And I think that Johnny Lee Middleton's bass on this is a real something that shines out, which you don't say much overall. I think he just is kind of like in the background, although how can you not when Chris Oliva is playing next to you? But the guitar solo on this song is so simple but so effective, and he just makes it sound so easy. I think New York City Don't Mean Nothing is a track that I've actually appreciated more and more over the years.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I love the way that it kind of picks up too. Like, it's just like it almost has that like in I'm Alive, where it's like dun, 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 dun. It kind of just builds into this crescendo. And again, it's there's a part in the story where the narration really kind of helps, where he runs into this other guy who's telling him the story, where he's like, I've been here. It's in the lyrics. I've been here since 81. And he just says, like, Jesus tells Jesus, like, get out of here, because New York City don't mean nothing. Like,
Yeah.
And so, I always thought, I feel like it's kind of harder to get the context of the story without the narrations to kind of try to tell you, like, whose point of view the lyrics are. Because I don't think, when we were younger, I don't think we realized that there were multiple people in the story beyond Jesus, Sammy, and Tex. I mean, those are really the only people that are outwardly mentioned lyric wise, but you hear the story and there's like, there's there's the old musician, and then the guy in this story, and then there's somebody, another guy who just like a complete stranger who just dies. So there's like, and like we were saying before, with some of the tracks that didn't make it on the album, just sounds like there might have been a more grandiose scheme. I would love to know what like the full story would entail. It would be amazing to see it come to life, like visually and audibly on a stage, perhaps. But they did a hell of a job just condensing the story into what Streets ended up being in the end.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think that of all the tracks, though, the biggest outlier for me is probably Ghost in the Ruins. I always thought that this track sounded like a bit of an outlier track, although I used to love it. I don't know that I love it as much anymore. The chorus was always a big hook, but for whatever reason, I think there's other tracks that maybe I overlooked when I was younger and now have this newfound appreciation for, whereas this one, I don't know that I like it as much. They still have the whole electric acoustic guitar thing going on here. I think that the backing vocals during the choruses are really, really helpful, and I think it lends a lot of power to the songs. And again, I thought that Johnny Lee's bass on this track as well were standouts. But for whatever reason, it's just a tick less than I think I used to. It goes down a peg, I guess, as I've gotten older.
Yeah, I would say this is probably my least favorite song on the album. I do like when you hear that kind of eerie, creepy, good, like acoustic guitar at the beginning. It reminds me very much of I want to say it was Scraggy's Tomb from Edge of Thorns. Just a very Chris Oliva-esque intro. There's some really good John Oliva screams in this song, but I do think this is kind of a connector of the story, I guess. I mean, even like even the narration prior to this is like there's not a lot going on. But again, like it's probably better than most other songs anybody else ever wrote.
Yeah, point well taken. And really for me, this is kind of like the back end of this album really just holds up as well as basically the back end of almost any album you'll hear. Not least of which was If I Go Away, which I know you mentioned you saw at TSO when they played it on this tour.
Yeah, I think it has a whole different meaning to it now that like Paul is gone and Chris is gone as well. And sooner or later, like a lot of these guys are probably not going to be around, hopefully later. But, man, this song just hit me like a ton of bricks when I was a kid. Because even outside of the context of the story, I think it's just so relatable. Just, asking yourself the question, like, what's your legacy if you're not there anymore? Like, will you be remembered? And how will you be remembered? And in that sense, I feel like it was easily relatable even as a teenager. And even now I listen to it and it's just really, really beautiful. It's probably, like I said before, if it wasn't St. Patrick's, this probably would have been my song of the week, just because I just don't think anybody does ballads the way Savatage did. And that, I think, is what really drew me into them as a kid, because I loved all the different sides of what this band could do.
3 words to sum this track up: beautiful, emotional, and introspective. And I think that just kind of hits the nail on the head for this one. John and a piano, and that's all I need. And it's just a phenomenal ballad. And it's interesting because the CD ends with 4 out of 5 tracks being ballads, which is just something I don't think is on any disc that I've ever heard except for this one. The only outlier being Agony and Ecstasy, which is a really, really iconic Chris Oliva riff to kick this things off. And it's a very heavy song. What I love about John Oliva is that he just pours his heart and soul onto this particular track. The recording of this track is some of John Oliva's best work. And he just nearly raps like the pre-chorus, which is kind of cool. It's something you don't really expect from John Oliva. And this song, I think, is ahead of its time in many ways, because it's showing just the sheer diversity that the band is.
It's, again, like the story, when you go from, like, If I Go Away, which, again, like, going back to the story, I think that Jesus is saying to himself, like, all right, if I'm going to become an addict again, I'm probably going to die. Like, what's going to happen if I go away? And by the way, John's performance on If I Go Away is incredible. If I had any tears left after St. Patrick's, I probably would have shed them during this song. But anyway, Agony and Ecstasy is literally the moment where the drugs are the ones singing the song. I never really thought of it that way. I kind of thought of it more of, it's from the point of view of a drug dealer, because that part right at the end where he's like, just remember, if you ever need me, I'm here. But it's actually the drugs in his brain saying to him, it's so brilliant. And the song is so, it's so tense, and it's so,
you feel your blood pressure start to rise as you listen to it.
It lends so well to the metal style. I mean, it's just on a roller coaster of an album. It's a roller coaster of a song. And when you add that imagery to it, where like just these, like it just speeds up, and it's just you can just imagine just somebody's brain going a million miles an hour trying to decide, like, what the hell are they going to do, and the next moment could define the rest of their life. I mean, yeah, it's just a great song. I don't think this is another song I don't think I appreciated as much when I was younger. I now it's one of my favorites on the whole album.
It's also buried on the back, which, I mean, we're not talking about track order here because I think it speaks for itself, but it's maybe a victim of its own placement on the album because it is buried towards the back. And then you end the album with 3 ballads in a row. And for my money, it may as well be one track. And I know that sometimes Somewhere in Time and Believer lump together, but I would lump Heal My Soul, the preceding track, in there as well. It is just a trilogy of powerful ballads that just end this album. And thus I'll probably just talk about them all together just because I think it's easy, and then you can kind of fill everyone in on the end of the story. Heal My Soul is another song about repentance, and who doesn't want to hear a song about that? It's Oliva and it's a piano, and this was another one that we saw at Prog Power that I just absolutely loved. And I remember the chill inducement that I had on my arms, like the hairs were sticking up on my arm. It was so beautiful. Then you go into Somewhere in Time, which is really the intro to Believe, which is, almost like a power ballad in many ways. And the instrumental section here just screams TSO. I'd be shocked if they didn't play that in the past at some point. And if not, they will in the future, just because it screams TSO. And then Believe might be their best song, arguably their best pure song that they've ever written, with just the best lyrics that I used to just sing because I knew every word of the song, and I still do. And the irony is what is it, like 3 chords on the entire song? It's so simple, but it's so powerful. And that's what they do better than anyone else. And without beating a dead horse, there's a beauty in the simplicity here, which just the end of this album is like, if you haven't started crying at some point, that'll do it. And then go off into the sunset.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it's like almost half this album is just these very emotional, really like heart-wrenching kind of songs. Man, I have to say the narration before "Heal My Soul" it kind of goes into the fact that DT has made this decision. He's going to get some drugs. He's going to score. This is it, and he finds this like just guy who's just like, you know, in an alley, and just he's dying. He's just and he has this chat with this guy, and the guy says to him, you know, the worst thing in life is to die alone, and the guy, you know, just dies there in DT's arms. And I think it's at that point, like, he has this epiphany that he's not going to go down this road again, and you know, he can have a better ending to his story. And so again, you tack that onto an already emotional song, and it gives a whole, you know, additional meaning. The really kind of light, like, organ sound that kind of is in the background of the song, it's very subtle, but also very haunting, almost like an angel is kind of like, he's like having this come to Jesus moment, no pun intended, you know, like, you know, snap out of it, like, you know, you still have a life to live. And then the narration comes to a close before Somewhere in Time. So like, because Somewhere in Time and Believe were kind of paired together as well, I think, in the liner notes as well. I always really liked Somewhere in Time. I thought it was a very underrated song. It's less, Heal My Soul is just a quiet kind of John and his piano kind of song. This is more where like the guitars and the orchestration kick in, and it's really dramatic, and it's really almost Broadway-esque. I agree with you completely. Like, this would be sick TSO style. Like, I don't know who would sing it. I don't know how John hasn't just gotten out there and done a song at some point with TSO. If anybody should have carte blanche on that stage, it's John. But I think this is one of the most underrated Savatage songs of all time. And Believe, to me, is a lot like, it's kind of like the bookend to Jesus Saves, where it's just, those are the two songs that I just beat to death over the years. But Believe really is like the Savatage anthem. I mean, it really is. And I think that since Chris passed away, it's become even more of just even more of a important note in the band's history. And they, in this song, they take a musical portion from When the Crowds Are Gone, and they reuse it in this, and then that'll get reused again in Alone You Breathe, which was the song that, you know, I think that was the real, I mean, the whole album of Handful of Rain was John's therapy after Chris passed away. But I think that song was his goodbye letter to Chris Oliva, and they bring back that same musical theme that kind of ties those three songs together. So, but yeah, this is, I mean, I just remember when they played it live at Prague Power, the entire crowd was just singing along and swaying, and it was just like this kind of like cathartic group therapy moment where everybody was just experiencing the end of this incredible thing together. It just, I think, is just such a lovely memory. I know one day we'll talk about, you know, like favorite performances and stuff like that. This is one of my all-time favorite things I've ever seen. I mean, maybe not even musical performances, but just anything that I have witnessed in my life. 90 minutes of just my mind being blown, and my heart, like my emotions being taken on every part you could imagine. It was just a really amazing experience.
Yeah, I mean, what else can you say? I'll just throw it out there. 1 to 10.
It's so hard because, like, oh my god, remember when people were ranking Nightwish albums on online? If you asked me to rank Savatage albums, I don't know that if I could. I think I would. I'd have to give this album a 9.75. I think that's just some of the songs that aren't all-time classics drag it down just the slightest bit, but I mean it's pretty much as close to perfection as anything I ever heard. Is it my favorite Savatage album of all time? I don't know. I think that this and Wake of Magellan for me are always going to be like this. I think is always going to be the epitome of the John song albums, and Wake is going to be the epitome of the Zach song albums. But
I'll take it one step further. I don't know that just because the score on this is higher or lower, that it necessarily means it's my favorite. In other words, I'd argue that even though it might be their best, I don't know that it's my favorite, if that makes sense. I'm going to give it a 9.5, damn near close to perfect. I was weighing between a 9.5 and 9.75. You can put them in a hat at this point. But this is about as close to perfection as you can possibly get. So excellent choice. I'm glad you picked it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like, I don't know. I think any Savatage album, with maybe Fight for the Rock notwithstanding, is probably a 9 or higher. I mean, maybe maybe Sirens and Power of the Night, I don't know. But like, as far as everything from like Hall of the Mountain King till pretty much till Poets and Madmen, I mean, this is some streak of of albums that this
and then
band
it just
churned
falls
out.
off a cliff and it ends. But good choice. I'm glad you picked it. I want to quickly just mention a couple or a few tours that are a lot of tour news this week. I mentioned the new Ne Habla Viscaris single last week. Well, they've announced a full U.S. tour going out with Beyond Creation and Persephone, who is phenomenal live. October 5th in Baltimore, ending up in New York City on November 13th. Raise your hand if you're going to that show. I'm looking forward to seeing both of those bands. Haken, also a band that we've covered in the archives, is going out with Arch Echo, who toured with Dream Theater last year. May 3rd in Nashville, ending June 3rd in Chicago. So they'll be doing a run of shows for about a month. And a show that was announced today, which is particularly interesting, Enslaved, doing a co-headlining tour with Insomnium, beginning April 5th in New York City, ending April 30th in Baltimore. I've always wanted to see Enslaved, so this looks like one that I'll be catching as well for the first night of the tour. So just a couple of...
Bring that box of tissues.
Yeah, exactly. Which brings us to our last episode for the year. And I wanted to do something a little bit different and a little bit special, but I think you're going to appreciate this. I am not sure.
Is there another episode that might be coming out before that?
Oh yeah, well, that's, you know what? You're absolutely right. But the last album episode, you want to talk a little bit about the special treat we have in store?
Sure. On Thursday, we're going to just drop an interview that we did with Ashley Edison of PowerQuest and Dendera, and as you may have heard, he's in another band, and he wanted to come on and kind of give us the scoop of how it all went down, and he goes into detail about the plans for PowerQuest's final year, as well as plans for Dendera, and but we'll let you hear that from the man himself, our first repeat interviewee, which is a real honor, I guess. But it was really great catching up with him. He's a really awesome guy. So we thought it'd be nice to have him kind of just give us a little update as to what's going on. And he's got his got a lot of hats on right now, so he talks about that, and
juggling a lot of balls in the air, if you will.
Yeah, a lot of balls in the air. So that's a little something to get you between this episode and the next episode, which you were going to tell us about
Yes.
right now.
So a band that I've always wanted to talk about, they came out with a few albums back in 2001 and 2003. And not only have we had requests for this band, but they've been on my personal list as well. And like I said, they have 2 albums. So we're going to do a career retrospective because 2 albums for Lost Horizon. So it's
As soon as you said 2 albums retrospective, I knew that's what it was going to be.
My gift to you, my power metal loving friend, is a Lost Horizon retrospective for a very, very short career for this Swedish power metal band. We haven't talked about Daniel Hyman on the show. We haven't talked about the fact that Joachim Cans from Hammerfall was their original singer. But no, we'll get to all of that.
Didn't even know that.
Yeah, it's I didn't know it either, but apparently he used to be the singer before they recorded. So we'll get to all that and more to end the year on a high note.
I'll tell you something really, really funny. I almost chose this exact episode months ago while I was like panic choosing something at the end of one of the episodes. I didn't pick anything, and I'm just doom scrolling through my iTunes, and I got to L, and I was like, man, if we this would be something where we probably just need to do both albums and so it's kind of funny that would come up again. I'm excited. That's going to be really interesting.
How familiar are you with these guys?
Not very, but no joke. I was in the car just the other day and Pure came on. Not at 5. I was actually at Pizza Hut. No. Pure, which is pretty much the one song I really know well. That song came on and I was like, man, how did this band get so popular off of 2 albums and then just disappear? Like, what a fascinating...
It's a great story. It's a great story, or kind of a tragic story, but I felt like it was, in order to do this justice, we have to do both of them. They're not very long albums. There's not a million tracks on these albums, so it's digestible. And I'm almost happy that you haven't heard it, because I have a feeling your mind's about to be blown. There's some phenomenal material on these 2 albums.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm not really even sure why, I talk about
I have a reason for that. And I may as well let the cat out of the bag. I think this is when, we're in college. You kind of fell off the cliff here a little bit around this time. It was
I know why I didn't listen to it when it came out. It's just like, I talk about being overwhelmed by massive discographies. This band is the opposite of that. It's like, go and listen to 2 albums and you got it. It's not like, digging through the UFO discography or the Iron Maiden discography. So, all right, whatever. Like my laziness will be rectified by next week. So
my Christmas gift to you, my friend. Thanks for listening. We love all the comments and the engagement. It's been phenomenal. Invite your friends into the chat if you think they have something to contribute. We'd love to hear more voices and more opinions. And we'll
invite them even if you don't think they have anything to contribute. We need our numbers to grow. They can just lurk. They can lurk in the darkness
as many do, because we know you're in there. It's just you don't seem to have very much to say. Some of you, but I digress. The Ashley Edison interview, Lost Horizon, and then we will get into the best of 2022 as we venture into January of next year. Enjoy the week, my friend. I will talk to you soon.
All right, take care. Always an absolute pleasure to talk about Savatage, as you may have noticed based on my long-winded nature. I'll try to keep it briefer, more and more brief next week.
Cheers.
Take care, buddy.
Believe